Hey, it's Alex Williams, the new SAG here at the Cloud Foundry Summit. We're going to do a little wrap-up of the day's events, and I'm lucky to have joining me Guy Pajarny of SNCC.
Yep.
And so, Guy, we were chatting a little bit. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit about what SNCC is, and we'll just start from there.
Sure. We help companies use open source and stay secure. Equifax just demonstrated what happens when you don't do that. So that's exactly what we do. We find vulnerable libraries or sort of known vulnerabilities in open source libraries, and we build a database of those, and then we have tools that help kind of integrate into your dev process to find them and then, more importantly, fix them.
Oh my gosh, now I want to talk about Equifax
and the series of fiascos that happened there, but it started with sort of not properly capturing a vulnerable library. It's all about security hygiene. I think Accenture, there was another big sort of security leak going on just now.
Oh yeah.
Once again, security hygiene. It's all about they didn't control access to some storage, some cloud storage, and lo and behold, data gets lost.
Interesting. Security hygiene meaning just keeping things just maintained and
fundamentally it's about volume. So as we're here at Cloud Foundry, right? It's all about volume of activity, increase the pace, be agile, be continuous, don't stop, and that implies just more applications, faster moving, more releases. And you need the basics of security controls. You need patching for your operating system dependencies, which Cloud Foundry does, and application dependencies like SNCC, and access controls and all of that. You need to rethink them. You need to do them at scale. So it's going to get worse before it gets better.
Yeah. So let's talk about the day. There was some news here, and I'm curious what your thoughts are about the architectural decisions that we're seeing from Cloud Foundry to really embrace, what has been known as Kubo, and now they're talking about really calling it their container runtime architecture and how that runs with an application runtime. But that's part of it. And then there's also kind of the Bosch angle and how they really kind of, really putting Bosch kind of front and center, And so I'm curious on your take on that, from your own perspective as a technologist.
Well, I think high level, I'm excited about it. I think it's good to embrace some flexibility. And at the end of the day, if you talk about empowering teams and organizations to choose the right tools for their job, then you want to empower them, right? And today, this decision between sort of the platform as a service model and containers is a decision, and there's sort of pros and cons to each. So I think there's a lot of value in the Bosch platform itself and in sort of the operational excellence and cadence, and we just talked about hygiene, right? Like even just patching and repeatedly running these processes and applying policies across the board that provide great value. I'm a little bit more inclined. Whenever you come into it, the opposite of flexible is opinionated.
Right.
And I like the opinionated aspects of the platform as a service because they can instill or embed controls and constraints onto the system to ensure that they're done right. If coming back, I guess a bit of a broken record, but if you talk about operating system patching, if you're using the PaaS environments, Cloud Foundry can do that for you. They can just update the underlying operating system. If you're using containers, they cannot. So it's great that there's flexibility, and there's a lot of value in the Cloud Foundry platform to just run containers, but it means now you, Mr. Operator, the organization that's running the platform, you need to, in a different way, build pipelines to continuously update your containers, and fundamentally not everybody does that well. So I like the flexibility. I anticipate there's going to be more of it, highlighting Bosch capability, providing additional models. We've got serverless, we've got other paths that I'm sure we'll see more of in the Cloud Foundry space. I'm a little bit more in favor, my biases, when possible, still stick to the PaaS.
Mm-hmm. And you want to stick to the PaaS because there's a clear path?
Because when it's a platform as a service and you just pushed code, you just pushed the application,
right.
The platform operator, so if I'm some big bank and I'm running Cloud Foundry paths, then I can put my constraints of what is allowed and isn't allowed by an application in there. I can make sure my servers are patched as part of the platform. With the Kubernetes model, when you go down to a container level, it sort of increases the scope of what is an app. The app is now a bunch of file system layers that are the operating system files, all the way to the actual application, the new application. And if the platform doesn't handle it for you, because you're just pushing a container and it's just running it for you and scaling it for you, then it means whoever has created that container needs to deal with all sorts of other constraints around what sits in that operating system earlier in the stream, and it's just not easy to do. And Cloud Foundry does it well. So that's hence sort of the bias in favor of constraints is not always a bad word.
No, it's actually
sometimes
very helpful.
It's a positive one.
Yeah. Right. There were some discussions in the keynote on the platforms that are being built. There was one company that provides digital key technology there, and they talked a little bit about DevSecOps, and that, and you were mentioning it as well. What is the your viewpoint on DevSecOps, just generally as a term, and how do you think it applied to Cloud Foundry?
So, I think the term DevSecOps, you can kind of take sec and put it in one of the sort of three permutations available in DevOps. I agree with it in concept.
Yeah.
I think the DevOps revolution that happened, the notion of inclusive security, the notion of embedding how you operate software and building operable software into your development stack, into the application, alongside the other kind of goodness of continuous and blameless models, right, where you're just sort of launching applications quickly and you're filling in production. I think that was massive in the world of ops, and there's two things that apply from that world to security. First, the security world needs to adapt. So as you ship more often, as the services that you ship are more and more micro, granular, down to a function maybe level, as you deploy or give more of these decisions around shipping new apps to developers, the old security controls that are gate driven, stop here and I will audit and I will review, they no longer work. So the same transformation that happened, everybody kind of likes this digital transformation term. It's actually, as buzzwords go, a pretty good one. The same transformation that you apply to how you develop applications needs to also apply to how you secure them. And to me, that's the epitome of DevSecOps. The flip side of that is the opportunity. So DevOps scaled ops. It went from a few operations people trying to wrangle or deal with sort of an onslaught of applications coming at them to something that is embedded, that is at the core, and it turned ops from a naysayer to an enabler. Now they take pride, organizations take pride in how great their DevOps teams are. And security is where ops was, whatever it is, like many years ago now, sort of 7-8 years ago. And we need to turn security we need to find those opportunities to turn security from a naysayer, from a blocker, from a hindering component for the business, just risk reduction, to be an enabler, to be, why are you going to thrive from a business perspective? Because you do security better and faster and in a more automated fashion, and you engage the entire company in it.
And does that mean enabling the developers to some extent?
I think so. I think it has to be embedded. So DevOps, it's interesting. The proficiencies still exist. Even within dev, not every developer can do everything on the system. So DevOps brought the operation skills into that same umbrella. It said, fine, there's a front-end developer and there's an ops or sort of a web ops, but a lot of the skills, they're all developers. They're all doing kind of development work. So yes, in that sense, you need security to move into that same umbrella. If it's dev, if it's ops, where exactly on that stack it sits, in my opinion, is less important, but it does mean that you pull security in, which means that the security ecosystem and the security tools need to come in and be able to support a non-expert user in these environments. Today's security tools are very, very much built for the breakers, not the builders, for the ones that have deep security expertise, and oftentimes actually a lot less deep in development practices. You need to kind of flip that around and make sure that the tools you build don't require some intimate knowledge of what a red team is, or sort of the subtleties of an advanced persistent threat, or even understand necessarily patch management all that well, right? The tools need to take that on, automation needs to take that on, just like what happens in ops.
So you had a booth here. You have a booth here at the show. What are people talking about when they're coming by? Who are the people that you're seeing are here at the conference?
There are really interesting companies around. I think, as always, Cloud Foundry is a lot about modernizing the enterprise. So
right.
Definitely a heavy representation of larger organizations, banks, insurance companies, telcos, that are trying to kind of move their technology stack into sort of the wave of the future. The conversations happening right now, a lot of conversations around Kubo, indeed, or sort of the container platform, being able to adapt to that. I think people are generally excited from the conversations I've seen. A lot of conversations around the marketplace. Increasingly, I expect the Pivotal marketplace to be, and the Cloud Foundry marketplace to be kind of a growing repository, or sort of a differentiator for this ecosystem as well. It's interesting.
Meaning Foundry, what they announced?
So
the third-party services?
Indeed. So I think a part of it is around the third-party services integrations that they've announced, and the improvement. There's constant improvement around the open service broker and their collaboration on it with a variety of cloud providers. So I think those are all steps. They've always been building towards it. I think it's reaching critical mass. And it's very interesting, and we chatted about this a little bit before, that the Cloud Foundry is a technology stack, right? It's a platform,
right,
and people are building it. But the organizations using Cloud Foundry are on a certain step in their journey, or in a certain phase in their journey of transforming how they handle technology and how they run their business. And I think that is very interesting to companies like Sneak, who are a part of that journey, right? We're very much looking at this notion of, you need to transform security as you transform development. And there are a lot of tools. It's not just security, and it's not just our aspect of security that needs to shift with it. So I believe there's a huge opportunity, and I have a lot of interesting conversations, both with other startups in the floor here, and with companies that are talking about it, and with the big cloud providers themselves, with Pivotal, with SAP, with IBM, who are excited to bring in more of that ecosystem, more of these modernization helpers, if you will, and bring them into that marketplace. And I think it's going to be big. I mean, I see a lot of those conversations, and I see the announcements kind of matching that perspective.
So the announcements matching the conversations that you're hearing on the show floor? Yeah,
it's chicken and egg a little bit about what drove what.
Right.
But the conversations I'm having on the show floor are about how can you connect into my system? How do I pull you in? I've chosen Cloud Foundry as a flow. Can I connect you through my API? Can I connect you through my build packs? Can I who delineation about ownership in the organization? So this is the questions for us. I get a little bit deeper around what's the best way to integrate. But also, when you talk to the consultancies, there's another sort of contingent of people here, which are sort of services companies that are helping bigger companies embed Cloud Foundry. They go straight there. They go into, okay, I've got this architecture that we've laid out with Cloud Foundry in this organization. Sort of, where do you hook in? And there are many, many hooks. The platform is very extensible. So the normalization, I think this is one area where Pivotal is actually kind of leading the charge a little bit more than Cloud Foundry, is that they try to normalize some of the definition of what does an integrator do and how do they connect, so it's terms that a user of the Cloud Foundry platform can understand a little bit more easily. Because if you ask each of us, companies that integrate into Cloud Foundry, we would all give you, I think
your own
domain from Pivotal was saying you ask 10 integrators, they're going to get 15 descriptions. It's not, so normalizing that so that the consumers can understand it more easily. So I think the announcements drove the conversations on the floor, but I think this theme of this as a growth area has existed in conversations prior to the event as well.
Yeah, I liken it to, what a conversation I'm hearing a lot more about is like, what is the, what are really the right levels of abstraction to create, right? So, if you have, installing Kubernetes is not so difficult, but managing Kubernetes is another matter, right? Yeah. And so that's just one example of kind of like a fundamental technology we're seeing emerge, but still very, complicated for an operations team to manage. But you want to give the operations teams like that capability to understand, or at least be able to manage the underlying infrastructure across their own data centers and public cloud services and third-party services. But then there's some debate then on what access and visibility then the developers should have. That seems like to be a discussion that is ongoing and will be a kind of a very important one over the next several months.
Absolutely, and it's all these, and we're in the world of ops, right? Of infrastructure. We've got all sorts of layers in the cloud, from bare metal to virtualization to containers to PaaS to functions to backend as a service, where you're like composing logical units and you're running it that way. And then the platforms like Cloud Foundry just sort of bring it down to, as an organization, you've got the choices around what choices you give your developers, and then even before that, you've got the choices of how do you as a platform, you're now a cloud operator in a sense, right? You're just using the stack to do it. What decisions do you want to do? What constraints? Coming back to constraints,
right,
do you want to enforce versus which flexibility do you want to allow? But it's exciting options, and I don't think any one of them is a silver bullet. So at the end of the day, I don't think any of these models is going away.
Right. So in terms of all those people who are coming by, are they both develop? Are they developers? Are they operations people? What's the kind of the mix that you're seeing in the people who are coming by and talking to you?
So I think I'm seeing, so I was at Cloud Foundry Summit US as well. I think my sense is there's a slightly higher representations of developers building on Cloud Foundry in this one than there were there. Still, the majority of people around are the ones that are operating the platform. So they're not the devs that are running an app on Cloud Foundry. It's the ones that are operating Cloud Foundry and running it. Which is fine. I mean, there's a lot of the information in this conference is oriented at them.
Right.
So I see that as the primary contingency here. It's the people that are using Cloud Foundry, whether the open source vanilla one or one of the vendored one, and running it in house. And then they vary a little bit around, whatever management level, but I think within that cohort, the majority are core practitioners that are indeed, these are the people with sort of hands on the keyboard, getting the platform running, and the depth of understanding that they have here about the platform, about all the different kind of micro statements and definitions. There's a lot to learn about Cloud Foundry, is on average quite impressive.
Interesting. So do you participate in other ecosystems out there? Like, what are some of the other ones that you're an active participant in where you might be having a booth, for example? Or
well, for us, we're still sufficiently young that we don't really sort of scatter a lot. We're big in more technology stacks, in the Node.js Foundation and the activities there. Definitely in the ops crowds like Velocity and O'Reilly Security that are trying to, Velocity trying to bring security into the ops, O'Reilly Security trying to bring ops into security. Those are the primary circles we work in. And then, of course, the serverless world. I spend a lot of time talking about serverless security and educating, and it's an area of growth for us as a company. I think just like in both platform as a service and function as a service, the infrastructure is abstracted away, and the risk from vulnerable open source libraries just becomes the primary way in for attackers. So these areas like PaaS and FaaS are just especially interesting for us.
So after being here for a day, for the Cloud Foundry show here, in comparison to other communities you're part of, are there comparisons you would make at all? Are there kind of corollaries that are interesting? Some unique aspects to Cloud Foundry?
I think a lot of them, actually. It's really interesting to contrast the audience and the type of conversations in this audience in this event to various others. So if you compare, for instance, to the original DevOps events, for instance, Velocity, the audience here is much more enterprise-oriented. It might not be, the people at Velocity would not consider it cutting edge in terms of DevOps. And there are some aspects of DevOps that have not, in my opinion, sufficiently sunk in here. For instance, there's a lot of people here that would define themselves as DevOps and would sort of shake off the developer's responsibility. And DevOps, to me, and to, again, most of the sort of that original crowd, is first and foremost around breaking down walls and embracing. So that's I think, maybe an area where, as compared to the more cutting edge DevOps worlds, this conference is a little bit more maybe behind, maybe a little bit more sober, maybe a little bit more enterprise-oriented. There's some comparisons to the serverless world that actually has a lot of enterprise, but this is a much more practical event, and the conversations here are much more practical, while serverless is a lot more sort of future-oriented, a lot more gaps. Here, right. the gaps are already getting sort of small, and these are like real heavy-duty businesses being built on this platform. So it's interesting. As compared to Node, I think this is really where sort of the dev versus ops still existing delta comes along. As I said, the primary audience here is the operators. It's the people that are running the platform. So if you look at the language conferences like Node, they are they're much more sort of developer oriented, and it's funny, like in each of these events I find I need to educate on a different aspect. And here it's definitely the developer workflow is the element that people want to understand but are not necessarily as deep in, while they've got their ops kind of down pat.
Well, Guy, thank you so much for taking some time to talk.
Oh,
really appreciate it. It's been helpful and insightful on the comparison of the communities like we were just talking about, but also the architectural decisions we're starting to see made and in the perspectives that you bring on it. So thank you very much.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Great.